The sea was different today. Gone were the heavy clouds, the howling winds, the relentless crash of waves against the boat. The storm had passed, just as all storms eventually do. Now the water stretched out like glass, shimmering beneath the warm sun. The soft breeze kissed the traveler's face, filling his lungs with air that felt lighter, easier. For the first time in what felt like ages, he set his bucket aside. There was no water to bail, no crisis to manage, just the quiet rhythm of the boat rocking beneath him. The traveler let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His mind, still wired from the storm, kept scanning the horizon, waiting for the next thing to go wrong. He was alone out here. That much hadn't changed. It was always just him, his boat, and the sea. Then a sound. A sharp, clear call from above. The traveler looked up to see a large bird soaring overhead, its wings outstretched, effortlessly riding the wind. It circled once, then again, dipping low before catching the breeze and lifting higher once again. He watched, but only absently. Birds flew, that's what they did. He turned his gaze back to the horizon, and then a splash. A lone dolphin broke the surface just beside his boat, its sleek body arcing through the air, droplets catching the sunlight before it disappeared again beneath the waves. A few seconds later, it resurfaced, gliding alongside his boat, matching his pace. The traveler watched, this time with more curiosity. He had seen dolphins before, but something about this moment felt different. Then it happened. The bird above let out another cry and dove sharply toward the sea. For a breath, it seemed as if it would plunge into the water. But at the very last second, the dolphin leapt high into the air, meeting the bird's descent. For a heartbeat, they were suspended together, sky and sea, feather and fin, moving as one. Our adventurer's breath caught in his throat, and time seemed to slow. It was beautiful, wild, and effortless, a moment of perfect synchronicity, a dance he had been lucky enough to witness. And suddenly, it all dawned on him. He wasn't alone. He never had been. He had been so focused on the struggle, on keeping himself afloat, he hadn't noticed the world around him. The sea wasn't just something to survive. It was something alive. And he was part of it. He sat with that feeling, letting it sink in, letting it settle deep into his bones. This moment was a gift, a reminder, something he could return to when the storms came again, when he forgot who he was. He sat down on his bucket and let the wind and tide carry his boat forward. He was still the one navigating, but he wasn't alone. This is So What? Who Cares? With Jeff Kolaski and me, Lora McCarville. Join us as we explore practical insights for an impractical mind. Here we are.
Here we go.
Okay.
What is regulation?
What is regulation in the nervous system?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when we're in regulated bodies, that doesn't mean we're in our preferred states. So we can be regulated and still feel emotions like anger and sadness, even though they're not our preferred states.
Mm-hmm.
Regulated means I have access to my heart mind. I have access to my values. I have access to self energy.
Hmm.
And we can't always be regulated. It's important that we can go in and out of that window of tolerance. We can go in and out and come back into regulation. There's a little bit of misunderstanding that regulation means calm.
Hmm.
Regulation doesn't mean calm.
Right. And so just to sort of recap that, I guess it's a way to manage our emotions,
I would
our
say
thoughts,
it's
bodily
more like
responses.
regulation refers more to the nervous system,
Okay.
but we're not just nervous systems. I think in social media, we've gotten a lot of information kind of speaking to like just our nervous system. We're not just a nervous system. We're so complex. There's so many other things than just the nervous system. But one part of being a human is having a nervous system, and being regulated to access your heart mind is what we're talking about in the way of regulation.
Right.
Yeah.
And can you speak as to why that is so important to us as humans, as that trying to live in this world? Why is being able to regulate so important?
Most of the time, if you like, I work because I have such a history of working with kids. I think it's easy to go like into a classroom, and let's say a kiddo flips a desk, over and flips their lid, moves outside their window of capacity, goes into a state of fight, flight, or freeze. If we were to then, when the kid comes back down, they have like absolute regret. Right? Because they took action that wasn't in line with their values, with their future, wasn't in line with how they wanted to act, wasn't aligned with their heart. It was aligned with a survival response. So then we're having to also work with kiddos who are like feeling that, right? So
Right.
that's like an extreme example, but I think we can all go like, oh, yeah, we don't want to be in those other states. We want to have agency over our life.
That despite what is happening in me, in my brain, what I'm feeling like doing, I can control that.
Yeah, I can make the wise mind a choice. But there are times in which we do have to respond in a fight, flight, freeze, or we do have to have a survival stress response that's extreme, right?
Okay.
But most of the time,
are you talking about like
here's like
actual
like there's a
threats?
car accident and the mom lifts the car to save the baby,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Like
Yep.
that's a very extreme case.
No, I
but
gotcha.
right, that's something where we're like we can't not in those moments.
Right.
And same when we go out of our window of capacity and we go into dysregulated states. Unfortunately, if we haven't grown that window of capacity, if we're living in chronic states of stress, then we are going to go into a survival response, even though we don't want to.
Right. So that's regulation. We said last episode we wanted to talk a little bit about co-regulation. Where does that play into things, and why is that?
Well, I think it's so important to speak to co-regulation because so much of our information and this is we're gathering information in these little tiny screens and getting some like, okay, we got to be regulated, and there's a sense of like I got to do it by myself. And then there's also an ask of our teenage kids and our little kiddos that they need to like regulate their emotions by themselves. And you are like developmentally, a child isn't even able to self-regulate. And that goes on for a long time. Like I'm talking like 20, like you, like a long time before your brain is actually developed well enough to have access to self-regulation. But when we're parenting or teaching or engaged in community or even observing and judging, we're saying, oh, they should have that together. they should be regulated on their own, but really they need co-regulation.
So co-regulation is through connection with others, finding ways to bring yourself back to that place.
Like back online, I
Okay.
sometimes say.
Yeah.
And co-regulation is not talking necessarily.
Okay.
It's not just like talking, because sometimes talking does not do the job.
Right.
Sometimes it's the presence of another body or dog,
Sure.
right? Sometimes it's a presence
Or cat.
or cat. Yeah, like that's co-regulation, right?
Mhm.
So it doesn't mean a bunch of things. It just means that there's something to help you get back online to your heart mind versus being in those states of fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
I think it's really important that you bring that up, because so much of what we, and we talked about this a little bit last episode, but so much of what we, I don't know if it's what we've been taught or what's been shown to us or what maybe we put on ourselves is, I want to be able to handle my own shit. I want to be able to not burden others. I don't want to need anybody, right? I want to be able to do these things on my own. And I think it's important to know that not only is it normal, but what you're saying is it's necessary, because we as human beings are
Wired for connection.
wired for connection. We are beings that would not do well in complete isolation. I mean, that's why, and it's a punishment to be in isolation in our totally screwed up, penal system. But
yeah. So there's a couple of things I'm thinking of, which is the story of a zebra. So if a zebra is running from a tiger, does zebra have a better chance of surviving if it's by itself or if he's with other zebra friends?
a lot more
Yeah.
zebras.
A lot more zebras. Zebra has a better chance of surviving. And if zebra's running from a tiger, do I tell the zebra to take a deep breath and chill out? No, I say run.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there are times in which co-regulating makes sense. And that means if there's not a lion or a tiger around, right? If there's not a threat, co-regulation, what that means is not that that you're able to move into a place of like, I'm chill, no worries, it's fine, but from a place of like accessing connection, right? So, and so maybe then something's shared or emotions are present, like grief, but it doesn't mean the grief isn't there.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say, for example, the daughter is at home,
Yes.
right? She's nervous at home by herself. Mom comes home. All of a sudden, nothing has changed except for the presence of mom. Is that co-regulating the emotion of maybe unnecessary fear, or is that just...
Okay, I think that's a great thing to kind of talk about. Like, not wanting to be home alone is a preferred state.
Okay.
If the mind of the said teenager is home alone and it starts to freak out that it's being and now they're in a state of anxiety and panic attack, and mom comes in and they come down together and mom knows how to bring her down, that moment is co-regulation. Right? That moment of when they're out of their window, co-regulation.
Okay.
But the other is more like, oh, I'm just so glad you're home. And that's like, yay, that's what love feels like.
Okay.
And look, you did it. You survived.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to what you said
Please.
about like this idea of co-regulation. So when we're younger, we have to co-regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's we find ways to co-regulate, to come back online when we're in states of fight, flight, freeze, when we're out of our window of capacity. As we get older, we do learn how to self-regulate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, oh, here comes like a little bit of anxiety. Oh, wow, I might have a panic attack. Can I wiggle my toes? I can bring myself back online. That doesn't mean I don't go to my friend and say, wow, I'm really dealing with this hard thing. Can I share that with you? Right. So carrying something by yourself isn't the same as being regulated or doing it yourself.
I'm just trying to process what you said.
Yeah.
That's what Oprah calls an aha moment.
Oh, right now for you? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
Carrying something by yourself.
Yeah. So when I say regulation, as we grow, as we get older, we do want to be able to have ourselves. Meaning like, oh, here's the sensation, emotion, feeling, memory. Whew, here I am. Okay, got me. Okay. But that doesn't mean I'm isolating my experience of me from others and having to do it myself or tend to my own stuff alone. It then means, ooh, I got myself back online. Now I'm going to go I might call a friend or, hey, wow, I'm really working with this thing. Do you have some time for me to share this with you?
Right.
Right. So that's self-regulation and still staying connected.
Okay. So that's,
yeah.
You are tapping into both of those things in a healthy way, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it, in a wobbly way, in an imperfect way, and a doing the best you can with the least amount of harm way.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And realizing that it's not, I think for me, at least just speaking for my own, it's not weakness to bring something to someone else. It's not necessarily burdensome to bring something to someone else, and to use them who have put themselves in your lives and vice versa to help you regulate those things you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I'd say like maybe process more than regulate. Now, there's a time in which like we've all been with someone, a friend or a partner, when they're having a panic attack, and you bring them like, okay, or they flip their lid and you work together to come back online. But when you're in connection with difficult things, that's not the same as regulating.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So then what happens is when we come back online, then we kind of have to examine some of our thoughts, like, oh, here's a thought I inherited. I need to do this by myself. And then we go, oh, okay, well, is that true? Is that going to guide me? Or is that something I picked up from being a child, in my family dynamic or in my culture? Right. And that's different. That's connection and intimacy.
Okay.
That's not regulation.
So then possibly a buzzword, codependency, where does that differ? How can we make sure that we're not, because I could see, if I'm putting myself in situations, I could see how if I gave myself, I don't know, if I gave myself full permission to let my wife, who's sitting in this room with us, if I forgot to introduce her at the beginning of this episode.
That's
Hi,
okay.
Bird.
Hi, I'm here.
If I decided somehow, or I started to how am I trying to say this? I could see myself getting to a place where being reliant on that help, regulating and whatnot, and to where it gets to a point where it goes, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore without her. Maybe I could, but now I can't. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, people in the room, but that feels like codependency.
Okay, so codependency, and I'm going to add another word, which is neediness.
Okay, yeah.
So codependency means I'm not okay unless you're okay. And your emotional state, my emotional state, is dependent completely on your emotional state. So if you're feeling off, if you're not okay, I'm not okay. I think we can see, for me, that really showed up in raising my kids and my son in particular. Like, I didn't know that it just would throw me. The emotions would, because it was my first, and I was like, this is really throwing me off. His not okay means I'm not okay, versus he's not okay, I'm okay, and I can be there with him while he's not okay. Then that's a child-parent relationship. When we're talking friendships or intimate relationships, and we're going into, and I'm not talking like I've got this all nailed, side note.
Oh no.
And I always like buckled at codependency. I was like, I don't like that word codependency, because we should be codependent on each other, right? Like, we should be depending on each other and feeling and connecting. And I didn't really understand what it meant until the last few years.
And that maybe is just a because of a
probably my
lack of
blind spot.
language.
Yeah. It's probably
Well,
because I was a
maybe,
little
yeah.
blind to my own codependencies, but it could be a lack of language.
Yeah.
But what I now have learned, especially because I have such preferred states of calm, and I live with Aries men, and they have a lot of fire, right? And I have had to learn how to be with fire. And I've misunderstood what that means because of my childhood. So what I'm speaking to is, how do I stay in my well-being and witness someone's upsetness or frustration at work, right? Without having to go into rescue or then carry the story with me so hard that they've forgotten the story that happened at work to them. And I'm still thinking about that asshole that wronged my lover, I'm not going to be okay with that, know? So that's different. Does that make sense, how that codependency? And then the other thing you said is when codependency or reliance on regulation. So now you had said, when someone relies so much on co-regulation, so you're living with someone who has a dysregulated nervous system, chronic states that are in and out of fight, flight, and you're the only one bringing them back online. How does that go? Like, you're the only one co-regulating. Now, we probably have parental experiences like that, right? It's different when it's in partnership. And then the work becomes in a partnership agreement on how that evolves. And it's actually okay to say, like, oh, I don't have space for that today. If, and how are you taking care of yourself and tending to your needs? How am I tending to my needs? Where am I assuming you have needs? That's a big one. Right.
Yeah. It almost reminds me of like being at the pool, and if you only rely on the lifeguard and you never like try to learn how to swim, so you're just flailing in the pool because you're only wanting to rely on that lifeguard. Instead of really holding yourself up or being able to. That lifeguard is there.
I love metaphors and visuals like that. Yeah, that's great, because there's a lot of adults who haven't, in like, maybe we'd use the word like Jungian, like individuation, like haven't like haven't grown.
What was the word?
Like individuation, like where they start to grow out of the thing that had happened. That's maybe driving their bus, right? The thing that's making them get in the pool and flail around. They haven't grown. We can't take things away that have happened, but has it integrated in your life enough that it's not guiding your life? Right? Individuation means like, oh, I'm fear and apathy that steal vitality, and the things I've inherited from my parents and culture will not guide my life. But instead, I have this access and have resourced myself well enough to swim to the edge and get out of the pool when it's too much.
Yeah. And maybe I'd like to hear both of your opinions on this, but not necessarily about fixing someone else's problems. It's more about creating a space that is safe for others to work through those things, or those that dysregulation. If we're using the same metaphor, it's, I might, Bird, if you can't swim, I might take you out into the deep end and hold you up until you, and give you a safe place for you to learn how to swim.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I'm going to let you flail and not do anything until you're about to drown, and then keep saving you and whatever, because that's going to be tiresome for me to keep picking up somebody that's flailing, but it's also not setting you up for any success.
And you might actually get out of the pool and go to the shallow end and start blowing bubbles.
Very true.
Yeah.
like if we're going to keep using the metaphor.
Sure.
And what happens, as we're growing, and we could go into like archetypes with this too, but I think like women in particular, and that I'm noticing as we grow and age, we do have to tend to that thing of neediness. And even if we're hyper independent women, if there's that thing of neediness running somewhere in us, we do have to tend to it. I don't know what that means for every person.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what does that look like?
Yeah, for me, it became a whisper of like, I got me.
Okay.
I got me. Like knowing I could count on me, not in that gross, again, hyper independent way, because I have definitely, as a single mom and how I was raised, like in a farm community on a farm, like and how I was raised with my parents, it was like hyper independence. You don't count on anyone, which does not set up intimate relationship well. So I definitely,
that's toxic masculinity that you mentioned last time. I mean, you're not.
Yeah, toxic masculinity isn't gendered.
No, it's a masculine behavior.
Yes,
Yeah.
And again, I tend to stay away from those words, but it is really fitting, it is.
It's language that people understand too.
Yeah. And it's at the very core, it was a behavior I learned as a child to survive.
Yep.
And it served me really well, and then it stopped serving
That's
me.
what I was just gonna say. Is it seems like there was a good place for that, because in a lot of those archetypes or those stereotypical behaviors, it seems like there's a time and a place where that can be helpful, but that can't be everything. Because that's when the toxic part comes in. There's nothing wrong with masculine. There's nothing wrong with feminine. But when you bring toxic into those, and that's driving the whole ship.
What makes it toxic is okay. So how about let's just use the word maladaptive instead of toxic.
Okay.
So maladaptive behaviors,
meaning cannot adapt to the situation it's in.
Meaning it's like no longer appropriate.
Okay.
It's no longer needed. It's a behavior. So if I go to my hyper independence as being maladaptive, it means I needed it when I was younger to survive certain experiences I was having.
Sure.
And at some point, I needed to trade in my maladaptive behavior of independence for the developmental behavior, which was actually invitation to intimacy, independence.
Independence.
No, in some ways, not codependence, but actually dependence in the way of like, here are my needs. Here are my needs, and this is what I want. And you can come in and we can have shared space, and is so different than I can do it myself.
I think when you speak from the lens of trauma too, those things are hard.
They're stitched
bags
in very
to
deep.
unpack. That's a hard car to trade in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that my teacher says some things get when they're not hardwired in, we have to go back in and hand wire them in. So like me learning to be vulnerable and tend to my neediness at the same time, which sounds so interesting because neediness is not the same as being vulnerable. Took some hand wiring. Meant like this doesn't feel natural.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm going to say my need
because
anyway.
I'm past my developmental stage where I'm soaking all this in like a sponge. I'm past the point where I'm going to take, that's why religion, for example, not to get off topic, but that's why that's so hard to lose if you've been raised in it. It's so hard to rethink because it was put there when you were such a dry sponge, for lack of a better term. But now you have to go in and using your own values and your own thought processes and your own experiences and you have to go in. And I like the thought that there's a difference between hardwiring and hand wiring, where I have to go in now and do the work to maybe undo some of the wiring that's been in this house that's now outdated and it's not functioning right. And it's, it could potentially burn my house down.
Right.
And I go in and I have to put wiring that feels right for me to go forward and to bring in things like.
Jeff, can I interrupt?
Please.
Because it's not going to feel right. You said put in that feels right. And it when you're hand wiring in new behaviors, thoughts, understandings, like some things don't feel right. It feels like uncomfortable, but I know that developmentally, at my age of 48, like, okay, actually, and my values, and
that's it.
That's going to align.
It feels, even if it feels uncomfortable, it feels value consistent.
Yeah,
it feels what I believe to be who I want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that almost reminds me of what was brought up in the last episode about comfort and safety not being synonymous.
Right.
Yeah.
That one hit you, didn't it?
It did. I felt personally victimized by that statement. As someone who loves comfort and safety a lot.
Well, and safety is such a tricky word because for us to grow, we're not going to feel safe or comfortable. For us to continue to develop, to have hard conversations, to practice communal care, like there are things that we're going to feel like about.
What is communal care?
There's lots of ways we practice communal care. Okay. I would say, so I have a friend who's a sociologist, and she taught me that community means you have shared values, but that doesn't mean all your values are the same. So if we look at communal care, it means these things here are really important to me and my set of values, the ones I've examined, not the ones I've inherited from my parents or culture. And in that way, I can connect to the people around me in my neighborhood, my community, local or global, and build relationship and support. Does that make sense? So it could be, tending to people with developmental disabilities, to anything in which communal care comes into play.
Let's just stay on the topic a little bit of co-regulation. What does it mean to be a steady or grounding presence for someone else?
So we come back to I'm going to bring us way back to where we talked about neediness and that place of, I need you in order to feel calm in my body. I need you in order to get through this thing. And versus then I have me, like the sense of okay, I can tend to myself and comfort myself and offer compassion and loving kindness to myself. We have to have those practices with ourselves, not full and clear, but in tandem to be that for others. Right? So settled bodies, I shared last time, settled bodies. There is, but how you can feel if someone isn't tending to their own well-being with compassion,
Throws off the vibe.
It throws the vibe off. If you're trying to sit with me and, help me through something and no, you'll know instantly how they're with themselves is how they'll tend to show.
I've heard it described trying to figure out how to be okay. There's a fire burning in the other room. And there's smoke coming off that fire and there's heat coming off that fire. And it feels like it's about to burn the house down. And I'm just supposed to somehow be okay with that person being a fire in the other room. Okay.
So that, again, we come back to like acute difference. Like, no, go in and get the person. Like that's, there are some examples out there. Like, no, that's not what anyone's saying or what anyone would ever do. You would go in and help the person. So sometimes spiritual bypassing, which is a term that was kind of trending for a while, but now it's become more like common language, maybe.
I'm not familiar with that.
Spiritual bypassing is like all good vibes kind of feeling. It's all good. That's kind of sitting in the room while the person's on fire. Like, I'll just manifest it that they'll get out and everything's all good. And there's are you following? Like, they're not looking at like the things that are happening and instead choosing to be maybe in bliss states because that's preferred than to be with like, okay, but actually people are hungry and actually people are suffering.
And there is something that you can do about that fire in the other room. Yes,
right. So sometimes regulation, like, oh, I'm just going to stay regulated and it becomes kind of like spiritual bypassing.
Okay. I'd like to just put this to you and see kind of what you come up with. What is, if someone wanted to take a small step toward becoming or practicing co-regulation or regulation or supporting others through co-regulation, something in that.
Yeah. So I sort of mentioned it in this podcast, like lightly sprinkled it in, but I can't say enough how self-compassion plays into that. So for you to sit with others means you have to sit with yourself and your own suffering, your own, not preferred emotion states being stuff, and how you offer yourself compassion or loving kindness. So what does that look like? I think metta meditation or loving kindness meditation is a great practice.
What was that
because
word?
Metta meditation, but it translates to loving kindness meditation. Yeah. And what that is what it does is it starts to create a dialogue, an internal dialogue of compassion. So that when we sit with the other, our tolerance to their discomfort, because we don't bring someone down by like making them come down or talking them down. It's by that actual thing of like holding space. And maybe it's tossing a ball, or maybe it's, hey, wiggle your toes. Maybe it's something like that. But most of the time it means you have to be able to tolerate someone's discomfort. And in order for us to like actually stay present to someone's discomfort, not just fake it, like freeze.
Sure.
I'm so comfortable with your discomfort. Not like,
I feel great right now.
Yeah. We got this. Not that.
Eyes
Sweating
wide open.
And shaking.
What the fuck? Yeah. So, because that's not what I'm talking about. Because you can get really good at faking it.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
That thing. But it really is can I be with how they're suffering? Can I be with my own? And if we can start to be with our own difficult stuff, then much easier we can sit with other people's difficult stuff. So in loving kindness, the meditation starts with self, and it's sensing yourself, and it's saying, and I'm going to close my eyes and you don't have to, but I will. And it's, may I be at ease. May I be well. May I be happy, and may I have compassion for my suffering. And we say that 3 times. And when I say happy, I don't mean like glee. I mean like knowing everything's going to be okay.
You
And then-
mentioned that last time. I love that.
Yeah. And so that practice of loving kindness, starting with yourself, it goes on that you do it for someone
Sure.
who's neutral, someone who's easy to love, and then someone who's difficult. There's a practice entirely with that. But sometimes, just like when fear comes, when nervousness comes, or we wake up in the morning and we just say those things over ourselves, worry comes to visit. I feel like this is the best medicine for worry. Then when another person's in those states, we can be with it easier.
So what? Who cares? We will be back next week. And if you're wondering who cares, I think all of us in this room do. So there you go.
Yep.
Thank
I care.
you.
Bird cares. Laura cares. Jeff cares.
Thank you. The traveler sat quietly, the dance of the bird and dolphin still lingering in his mind. He knew the moment had passed, but it didn't feel lost. It was now a memory, a reminder. Storms would come again, the waves would rise, but when they did, he could return to this, to the warmth of the sun, the steady rhythm of the sea, and the knowing that he was never truly alone.